The tingling started in my hands sometime in late June. 3 weeks after my son-in-law clasped a silver bracelet around my wrist and told me it had belonged to my father. I'm not a sentimental man by nature. 40 years working construction in Kingston will do that to you. You learn to read load-bearing walls, not people's intentions. But that afternoon, sitting at the patio table while the maple trees in my daughter's backyard threw long shadows across the grass, I felt something shift inside my chest. Not dread, not yet. Just a low, unnameable knowing. The same kind you get when a building settles wrong. When something in the structure isn't where it's supposed to be. If I'd listened to it then, I might have saved myself 6 months of hell. Hey, if you're watching this, thank you for being here. What I'm about to share isn't easy to talk about, but I believe someone needs to hear it. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And leave me a comment below. I read every single one. Some details of this story have been changed to protect privacy, but the core of it is real. And the message about trusting your instincts is something I carry with me every single day now. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. My name doesn't matter as much as what happened to me. What matters is that I was 67 years old, recently retired, and completely blindsided by the people I loved most. I'd spent 4 decades as a construction foreman. Commercial builds mostly, schools, municipal buildings, a couple of hospitals up near Napanee. I knew how to manage risk. I knew how to spot a structural problem before it became a collapse. I was good at my job. I was less good, it turns out, at seeing danger when it came wrapped in family. I live in Kingston, Ontario. I have one daughter, she's 34, works in healthcare administration. Married a man named Xavier about 3 years before all this started. Xavier. Even saying his name now takes something out of me. He was charming when my daughter first brought him home. Tall, well-spoken, had a way of making you feel like the smartest person in the room. I'll admit I liked him at first. I thought my daughter had done well for herself. But there was always something, a small thing I couldn't name. The way he'd steer conversations just slightly off-center whenever money came up. The way he'd ask about my retirement savings, not intrusive, just curious. The way his eyes would calculate things before the rest of his face caught up. I told myself I was being an overprotective father. I told myself I was looking for problems where there weren't any. I retired 14 months before Father's Day that year. My wife had passed 3 years earlier, lung cancer, quick and merciless, and after she was gone, I threw myself back into work for a while. Not because I needed the money, but because I didn't know how to be still. I had a solid pension from the union, a decent RRSP, and a house that had been paid off for 12 years. I wasn't rich by any stretch, but I was comfortable. Comfortable enough, apparently, that my son-in-law had noticed. Father's Day fell on a Sunday in mid-June. My daughter hosted a small dinner at their place, just the 3 of us, which I appreciated. She'd made my favorite, barbecued ribs with her mother's potato salad recipe. There was a bottle of Niagara Red on the table, the kind of effort that tells you someone was actually thinking about you. After dinner, Xavier leaned back in his chair and looked at me with the kind of careful expression that performers use, where the emotion is just slightly too deliberate. He said he had something for me, said he'd been tracking it down for months. He brought out a small wooden box, plain cedar, not velvet, which felt more honest somehow. Inside, resting on a square of white cloth, was a silver bracelet, solid, heavy, masculine. Engraved on the outer surface with a simple Celtic knot pattern, the kind of work you'd see in old Scots or Irish metalworking. He told me it had belonged to my father. I want you to understand what that meant. My father died when I was 22. I didn't have much of his, a watch that broke years ago, a few photographs in a shoebox. When Xavier said he'd found this bracelet through an estate clearance service that handles old storage lockers, that he'd identified it as belonging to my family and tracked it down specifically for Father's Day, something cracked open inside me, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. I didn't ask the questions I should have asked. I didn't ask which storage facility. I didn't ask how he'd confirmed it was my father's. I just looked at that bracelet and I wanted it to be true, and that wanting made me blind. Xavier clasped it around my wrist himself. His fingers worked the clasp with a practiced ease that I noticed but didn't hold on to. He asked me to promise I'd wear it every day. he said, and I remember this exactly. It's the only piece of him you have left. Don't let it out of your sight. My daughter was watching from across the table. Her eyes were wet. She reached over and squeezed my arm and said it was beautiful. I promised, and I meant every word of it. The first signs were easy to dismiss. Within a week of wearing the bracelet, my hands started to ache. Not the old familiar ache of overworked joints, but something deeper and more diffuse. A heaviness that started in my palms and moved up into my forearms by evening. I put it down to the weather. Ontario humidity in late June will stiffen up joints in a hurry, and at 67, that was nothing unusual. By week 3, I was waking up nauseated. Not dramatically. No sprinting to the bathroom, not at first. Just a low-grade wrongness in my gut every morning when I swung my legs over the side of the bed. A quiet revolt that would ease off around mid-morning and return again by early afternoon, like it was following its own timetable. I drove myself to the walk-in clinic on Princess Street because getting a same-day appointment with my family doctor, Dr. Chen, was harder than getting a construction permit approved in Ottawa. The clinic doctor ran a basic panel, CC metabolic screen, and told me I looked fine. Come back if it gets worse. That was the first of many times I'd hear some version of those words. It got worse. By month 2, I'd lost nearly 12 pounds without trying. My appetite had collapsed. I'd stand in front of the fridge and feel nothing. No hunger, no interest, just a faint underlying queasiness that made food feel like a threat rather than comfort. My hair was thinning noticeably. I'd see it in the shower drain, in my pillowcase in the mornings. My skin looked off, not obviously sick, but drained somehow, like someone had turned down the contrast on my own face. Xavier noticed. He'd come by the house 2 or 3 times a week. He was doing some kind of online financial consulting he was always vague about, and he'd ask how I was feeling with what looked like genuine concern. His eyes would drift to the bracelet. Always back to the bracelet. A quick downward glance, almost imperceptible, to confirm it was still there. At the time I read it as affection, a son-in-law checking to see if I was wearing his gift. I took it as evidence that he cared. My daughter noticed something different. She'd watch Xavier watching the bracelet, and something in her expression would tighten for just a moment before she looked away. She never said anything directly in those early months, but I could see the question forming behind her eyes, the one she wasn't yet ready to put into words. Dr. Chen finally had a cancellation in late August. She examined me thoroughly, ordered expanded blood work, referred me to a specialist at Kingston Health Sciences Center for a gastroenterology consult. The wait was 6 weeks, which is simply the reality of healthcare in this province. In those 6 weeks, I continued to deteriorate. The specialist found nothing structurally wrong. Dr. Chen ran thyroid panels, checked my liver enzymes, ordered a chest X-ray. Everything came back within normal range. She suggested it might be grief-related. My wife's passing 3 years earlier, the adjustment to retirement. She wasn't wrong that those losses were real, but I'd managed 3 years after losing my wife without my body coming apart. This was something else. 3 months in, the numbness began. Faint at first, the outer edges of my feet, the tips of my fingers, a mild pins and needles sensation that wouldn't quite resolve. A neurologist at the regional hospital tested my reflexes and nerve conduction, slightly abnormal results, but not dramatically so. She wanted to follow up in 4 months. 4 months. I didn't have 4 months to spare. Xavier had started making my morning coffee when he visited. He'd let himself in with the key my daughter had given him, and by the time I came downstairs he'd have 2 mugs ready on the counter. I never thought twice about it. The man was trying to help. I was grateful. I understand now, grateful for one of the mechanisms being used against me. By month 4, I could barely get through a full day without lying down. My daughter had begun coming by every evening after work. She'd bring food, soup from the deli on Division Street, tea from Tim's, things I might actually manage to eat. She'd sit with me at the kitchen table and talk about her day, and I could see the fear she was working hard not to show. She was terrified for me. And she was watching Xavier, in a way I was beginning to notice had a particular quality. Less casual concern, more quiet surveillance. One Thursday evening, after Xavier had left, she sat down across from me and folded her hands on the table the way she does when she's about to say something difficult. She asked me to describe exactly when my symptoms had started. I told her, late June, about 10 days after Father's Day. She was quiet for a long time. She asked if she could look at the bracelet. I took it off and handed it to her. She turned it over slowly, examining the edges, the clasp, the inner surface. She pressed her thumbnail along the inside of the band and frowned. She said she wasn't sure, but something felt slightly off about the interior. Almost porous, she said. Not smooth the way polished silver should be. I told her she was probably imagining things. I said it gently, but I said it, and I handed the bracelet back and clipped it onto my wrist because I'd made a promise and I intended to keep it. She didn't argue, but she didn't look convinced, and she kept watching. The day everything changed started like every other day that autumn. Gray sky over Lake Ontario, cold that had settled into my bones in a way that had nothing to do with weather. I needed to get out of the house. I'd been spending too much time inside my own deteriorating body, too many mornings staring at a kitchen ceiling while my hands shook against my coffee mug. There's an artisan market that sets up Saturday mornings near the waterfront. Local craftspeople, antique dealers, the usual good mix of ceramics and jam and old things looking for new homes. I'd gone there every week for years with my wife. I hadn't been back since she passed. I drove myself down to Ontario Street, parked and walked slowly along the water. The morning was cold and clear. The market was busy. Kingstonians don't let November stop them from their Saturday routines. I almost walked past the man entirely. He was in his early 70s, with a Quebec accent, and the careful, economical movements of someone who has spent a lifetime working with small, precise things. He had a folding table covered in a velvet cloth, and arranged on it were antique watches, rings, and silver pieces. A magnifying loupe sat near his hand within easy reach. He glanced up as I slowed near his table, and he glanced at my wrist. Not casually, with the specific attention of a professional who has just identified something that doesn't belong. He said, in accented English, that the bracelet I was wearing was very interesting. I thanked him and told him it was a family piece, recently recovered. He asked if he might take a closer look. There was no sales pitch in the request, no charm, just the quiet directness of someone who wants to see something more clearly. I extended my arm. He didn't touch it immediately. He looked. Then he lifted the loupe to his eye and leaned in. After a long moment, he straightened and looked at me steadily. He said his name was Armand. He had been working with silver and gold for 43 years, trained in Montreal, worked for many years in Toronto, retired here to Kingston a decade ago. He said he could tell, without any doubt, that this bracelet had been modified, recently and deliberately. The inner surface had been treated with a substance. There was a network of micro-perforations along the inner band, tiny, precise holes that would never appear on a piece of original craftsmanship. Someone had done this with skill and intention. He asked how long I had been wearing it. 4 months, I told him, nearly to the day. He asked if I had been ill. I stood there on the waterfront in the November cold and could not speak for a moment. He said, very gently, that I needed to remove the bracelet immediately and take it to the police. He was not speculating, he said. This was 43 years of knowing exactly what unaltered silver looks like, and exactly what it looks like when someone has interfered with it. Whatever was coating the inside of that band had been engineered to release slowly, through prolonged skin contact. That was the only explanation for what he was seeing. I took the bracelet off my wrist. My hands were shaking. Armand produced a small, sealable plastic bag from beneath his table. He kept them on hand, he explained, for questions of provenance at markets like this one, and I dropped the bracelet inside. He sealed it carefully. He gave me his card and wrote a second phone number on the back, in case the police needed a professional assessment. He looked at me directly and said, "Whoever gave you this did not give it out of love." I called my daughter from the parking lot. I told her what had happened. There was a silence on the other end that told me she'd been bracing for exactly this kind of call. Not hoping for it, but somewhere in the back of her mind holding space for it. When she spoke, her voice was steady, in the way that people are steady when they have been frightened for a long time, and the moment of action has finally arrived. She said, "Dad, I need to tell you something first." She had found documents on Xavier's laptop 2 weeks earlier while he was in the shower. She hadn't said anything because she wasn't sure she was reading them correctly, because she was afraid of what it meant if she was. A life insurance policy. On me. $800,000. Taken out in Xavier's name 8 months ago. A 2-year contestability period ticking down. We went to Kingston Police that afternoon. My daughter drove. Neither of us talked much. The detective who took our statement was a compact woman in her late 40s named Paquette. She had a notepad and the particular stillness of someone who has heard terrible things before and knows how to receive them without flinching. We sat in a small interview room, and I told her everything. From Father's Day through to the market that morning. My daughter laid out the photographs she'd taken of the insurance documents on her phone. Detective Paquette looked at the sealed bag containing the bracelet, then looked at me. She told me something I hadn't known. Standard blood panels in Canadian emergency medicine do not routinely screen for heavy metal poisoning. The tests are not part of the basic OHIP-funded diagnostic workup unless a physician specifically suspects exposure and orders targeted toxicology. She said this gap appears in forensic cases more often than the public realizes. She was already reaching for her phone as she said it. They drew blood at Kingston General that same evening. Targeted toxicology. Cadmium, lead, arsenic, thallium. The results came back 48 hours later. Cadmium, elevated well above normal range, consistent with prolonged dermal exposure over several months. That was the word that finally named what had been happening to my body. Cadmium, a heavy metal used in certain industrial compounds, colorless, odorless, accumulating in bodily tissue over time, affecting the kidneys and the peripheral nervous system, and producing exactly the constellation of symptoms I'd been living with. The nausea, the weight loss, the numbness in my hands and feet, the fatigue that had swallowed my days whole. The mild kidney abnormalities that had shown up in my earlier tests had not been dramatic enough to trigger a heavy metal screen, because no physician had any reason to suspect one. I was a retired man with a sore stomach and thinning hair, not a poisoning victim. There was no reason to look deeper. That was what he'd counted on. That was the whole architecture of it. Detective Paquette's team moved quickly. A search warrant for the house my daughter shared with Xavier was executed the following morning. In a locked cabinet in the basement workshop, they found a sealed container of a cadmium compound used in certain specialty plating solutions. They found receipts for a jeweler's precision drill and a set of fine metalworking tools, purchased 8 months earlier. Shortly after the life insurance policy had been activated, they found browser history documenting research into heavy metal poisoning, symptom progression, rate of accumulation, diagnostic limitations in standard medical practice. He had done the research. He had planned the timeline. He'd counted on an overextended healthcare system and a trusting old man who didn't want to think badly of his daughter's husband. He'd nearly been right about all of it. Xavier refused to admit anything during questioning. That was his right. He didn't need to. The evidence was already speaking in a language no one could argue with. My daughter filed for divorce that same week. She told me later she hadn't cried when she signed the papers. She'd expected to, but when the moment arrived, she just felt something loosen inside her, the specific relief of having stopped pretending not to see what she had been seeing for a long time. She said she was finished being afraid. She said she chose me. She said it simply, like it should have been obvious, like there was no real choice at all. I still haven't found the right words for what that meant to me. I'm not sure I ever will. The trial was 6 months later. I testified. Armand appeared as an expert witness and described the bracelet's modification, the microperforations, the applied compound, the deliberate engineering, with the authority of someone who has spent 43 years learning to see what other people miss. The forensic toxicologist explained cadmium accumulation, the timeline, the mechanism of dermal absorption. The Crown presented the insurance policy, the workshop tools, the search history, the compound, the receipts, the totality of a plan that had taken months to build and was designed to take years to kill. Xavier was convicted of aggravated assault, causing bodily harm and attempted murder. 9 years in federal prison. I'm told that sentence is within the normal range in Canada for an attempted murder where the victim survived. It doesn't feel entirely like justice, and it doesn't feel entirely like not justice. It just feels like a number. The only language the system has for something that doesn't have adequate language. My recovery took the better part of a year. Cadmium doesn't leave the body quickly or cleanly. There is no antidote. Treatment means removing the source of exposure, which we had done, and supporting the affected organs while the body slowly works to clear what's accumulated. My kidneys required monitoring for months. The peripheral neuropathy in my hands faded gradually, unevenly. My appetite returned in stages, cautiously, like something that had learned not to trust the body it lived in. My hair grew back, thinner than before, but there. My daughter comes for dinner every Sunday now. She'll cook. Nothing complicated, just good food made by someone who thought about what you'd want to eat. We sit at my kitchen table and talk about her week, my recovery, whatever's happening in the world. Sometimes we don't talk much at all, and that's fine too. Silence with someone you trust completely is its own kind of medicine. I went back to the waterfront market one Saturday in the spring. Armand was at the same table, arranging the same careful collection of old things. He looked up when he saw me coming and nodded once. The way people nod when words aren't quite adequate to the occasion. I told him I was doing better. He said he was glad. We didn't make a ceremony of it. I bought a small silver ring from his table, simple, clean, no hidden compartments, and I thanked him again for what he'd done on that November morning. He said he'd just done what 43 years of looking closely at things had prepared him to do. He was sorry it had been necessary. I kept the cedar box Xavier had given me. Not the bracelet, that's in evidence storage, presumably forever. Just the box. It sits on my workbench in the garage. I'm not entirely sure why I've kept it. Maybe it's a reminder. Maybe it's proof that something happened. Something real and terrible and survivable. Maybe I just need something to look at sometimes, when I want to remember how close I came and that I'm still here. I've thought a lot about what drove Xavier to do what he did. Financial trouble, apparently. Substantial debts to private lenders, the kind who make their own repayment schedules. He'd seen the insurance policy as a solution. He'd run the numbers and arrived at me as the answer. My life reduced to a line item on a balance sheet. I've also thought about whether I should have seen it coming. The truth is, I sensed something from the beginning. The discomfort I felt around him was real. I overrode it because I didn't want to be the kind of father-in-law who poisons his daughter's marriage with unfounded suspicion. I chose comfortable blindness over uncomfortable clarity, and I nearly paid for that choice with everything. Don't do what I did. I'm telling you directly. Don't override the signal because you don't want to face what it's signaling. You don't have to act on every uneasy feeling you have about someone, but hold it. Keep it somewhere honest inside yourself. Because sometimes that low-level warning is the only early alarm you're going to get. I also want to say something about my daughter. She didn't have to do what she did. She had a life with that man, a home, a future she'd built and planned. She chose to dismantle all of it to protect me. She came to me with those photographs on her phone and she said, "I don't know yet what this means, but I know it means something, and I'm on your side." She said that before there was a bracelet in an evidence bag. She said it out of clarity and love, and a kind of bone-deep loyalty that I will spend whatever years I have left being grateful for. I believe that God places the right people in the right places at the right moments. He placed Armand at that market on a cold November morning in Kingston. He placed the instinct in my daughter to start looking when the looking was still dangerous. He gave 43 years of expertise to a retired jeweler from Montreal, who happened to set up his table near the waterfront on a day when I needed to get out of the house and breathe. I don't know why I was given a second chance when others aren't. I don't have a clean answer for that, but I try not to waste what was handed back to me. I try to be present. I try to have dinner with my daughter every Sunday and actually pay attention to the conversation. I try to notice the things I used to walk past. The way Lake Ontario goes silver just before a storm. The smell of wood smoke in November when the temperature drops below zero and the whole neighborhood feels like it's settling in for the season. Small things, real things. Pay attention. Trust what your body tells you. Trust the people who have shown you, through their actions and not just their words, that they are genuinely on your side. And if a stranger takes a careful look at something you're wearing and goes very still, listen to them. They might be seeing something you've spent months learning not to see. If this story meant something to you, please leave a comment below. Subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep sharing these stories. And if something in what I've shared today connects with your own experience, I want to hear about it. Leave it in the comments. You're not alone in this, and you never should have to feel like you are.